Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we are reviewing Ferrari. Directed by Michael Mann, Ferrari follows the personal and professional struggles of Enzo Ferrari, the Italian founder of the car manufacturer Ferrari. The film stars Adam Driver, Penélope Cruz, Shailene Woodley, and many more. So Jeffrey, what do you think about Ferrari?
So this film was directed by the great Michael Mann. It's essentially his first film in almost a decade because he's made primarily TV work since Black Hat. Michael Mann is primarily known for these intense procedurals and crime films headed by quietly obsessive men driven by ego and ambition. But at the same time, there's always this like soft existentialism to his work that I've always really admired. As exciting as his films are, and they often feel like pressure cookers just kind of waiting to explode, they're known for this anxiously meditative quality that I always have found really interesting in his work. I thought that it was quite a bit a cut above other crime epics or other crime films. He was able to engage with these ideas in such a meditative and quiet way, and also to go with some of the bombast of his other work. What I could say about Ferrari is it feels like an appropriate continuation of his interests. It's a film that has an undercurrent of just like extreme smoldering tension that feels like it could explode at any moment. As I alluded to before, Mann is very good at shooting action sequences, and in this case, with the film, racing sequences. I think that he is also very adept at shooting suspenseful conversations, and that's where he really excels here. One of the films that he's most known for is Heat, and there's two scenes in Heat that he's most known for. This scene that's very long, it's a shootout in a parking lot of a bank that goes on forever, and it's extraordinarily directed. And the other scene in Heat, in another 3-hour movie that he's most known for, is a very simple scene in a diner between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and it's directed with such precision and such tension. It's an extraordinary scene of dialogue. So he's always known for these opposites, and frankly, he's doing it so well here. In my opinion, the most invigorating and spine-tingling moments in this film are these conversations between two people, or even these little soliloquies that Ferrari has by himself at his child's grave. There are so many great character moments in this film that I see Mann evolving, but I also see him commenting on his own work and expanding his own work in a very meaningful way.
That was very well said. I didn't quite think of this as a meditative film until you said that, and now it's starting to track a little bit in my brain. But I do agree that this film did a wonderful job building tension in a scene. There were so many times where I felt like something was about to happen, only for a following scene to either ratchet up the tension or diffuse it for later on. In a way, this film trained me to not really expect what was to come next because of those scenes. And I could think one great example of that comes to this check, because there's this check that Laura, Penelope Cruz's character, who is Enzo's wife, she wants money in exchange for her shares to be utilized by Enzo to sell a portion of the company to raise money. And this check starts out with a tense exchange, a verbal exchange between the two of them as to the deal making of this process. And then it goes from that to her actually receiving the check, but it's unsigned. So she can't even use it because it's unsigned. So she just takes the rest of the contract with her until it gets signed. So this check has this huge arc of tension that is built with it. I thought that was a great example of one of the ways in which tension was built through this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there are innumerable examples of that. There's this great scene in the church where they're all at mass and they hear a gunshot outside, which signals that Maserati is starting their race, and they all take out their stopwatches and click on their stopwatches. What's the number one thing associated with suspense and tension? It's clocks, right? So it's this quiet scene of all these old guys in a mass of all these ticking watches as we're intercutting with Maserati going around the track, and it builds tremendous suspense out
and
of
the priest talking as well.
Nothing. Yeah, this goes with all of the racing scenes, but Mann has a tremendous editing ability here where he lets us know all of the details of the cars. Ferrari throughout the film is always commenting on the details, the shape, the tires, all of these different details about the cars that are racing, so they're in the back of our mind as they're racing. We're like, oh man, we got to watch that tire, right? But in addition, he does these quick cuts while the drivers are driving that shows them shifting gears. It shows them like pulling levers, all of these different things that they're doing to go around bends or these more intense parts of the race that they're succumbing to. And it's just edited so brilliantly. It gives us such a sense of detail of how these things come about. So I want to talk a little bit about Adam Driver. I think we both generally have some very positive feelings about Adam Driver. He's a very versatile actor. I mean, anything from Annette to Girls to he was in
Marriage Story.
Yeah, Marriage Story. I mean, Marriage Story, he was a very vulnerable, sad guy who cried at everything and was just like a much more sensitive soul. In this film, he's much more inscrutable. He's much more subdued. It's a completely different performance. And to be honest, it's actually got me thinking again about The Iron Claw, which is a film that we reviewed recently. And I'm still astounded thinking back on that film, how it didn't work for me and how it should have worked for me. And in that review, we talked a lot about restraint and how restraint was such a negative in that film. In this film, restraint is a much more positive thing, in my opinion, because there's so much going on underneath. The film allows you to make your own portrait of Ferrari in a sense because it gives you all of these pieces of his personality. We see him grieving his son. We see him mourning his marriage in that graveyard soliloquy that I was talking about before. We see his obsessive perfectionism with the design of his vehicles. We see his captivating charisma and the wit with which that he talks to the press. That's so funny. We see the tenderness with which he treats his second family compared with some of the hostility that he treats Penelope Cruz's character. All of these details are so finely tuned and they're not at all spelled out for you, but when taking together all of these contradictions, they make a very deep characterization that I was just fascinated by.
Yeah, I completely agree. We were talking in that conversation as well about the subtext of either conversations or a look. I thought he had this quality about him which made him seem very indifferent to a lot of things that are happening in the movie, whether it be a setback or a tragedy that occurred. But as you learn more about him and the film shows you a little bit more about his character, you learn that his rough exterior is more a shield than it is him being uncaring.
Yeah,
he
completely.
does have a caring side, but I think he's built this shield over the course of his life. That being said, I do think his character was a little bit of a weaker part of the movie for me. And
oh, interesting.
Yes.
To hear this.
And I don't think that is Adam Driver's fault at all. I think he's brilliant in the movie. But I think it's because of what the movie decides to focus on. And that is more so his relationship with his wife and his mistress that he has his other son with. This is something we've seen done a lot in biopics this year, as well as Maestro, which we recently saw as well. That movie tended to focus on the family relationships and the dynamics between the wife and the
this is a year of the very unconventional biopic.
Yes, it is.
Maybe we'll talk about that more in our year-end
it's,
video.
It's becoming more conventional now.
Yeah.
I think this attention to these relationships, while I do appreciate it, I think they're a benefit to the movie, I did find them to be a little bit negative in terms of his personal character. I wanted to know a little bit more about what made him tick personally. What it is he loves so much about racing. What is it so much he loved about building cars? There's a wonderful little scene that he has with his son, Piero. He's showing him how the engine is built and he's getting feedback from his son, and it's a really cute, intimate moment, but I can't help but feel it was shoehorned in there to give us that little bit of passion in the movie of why he does what he does.
See, I actually don't feel that way at all. I feel that all of the vulnerability that he shows in these tiny moments, whether it's occasionally with Penelope Cruz's character, whether it's occasionally with his second family and his son or his passed away son, I think as you're alluding to, his ambition and his needless obsessiveness about winning is the shield for all of that. And that's a fairly complex portrait. I kept oscillating between Enzo as a victim of circumstance and Enzo as the harbinger of his own downfall. And the fact is, both of them are true at once, which makes this a complex and interesting film. He's a relentlessly cold egotist, but at the same time, he's self-reflective, he's sympathetic in moments, and you can't help but feel for him in moments that he's trying to hold in his entire life together, where his wife could be leaving him, he has a second family that nobody knows about, he has financial ruin in his future, his mom even says at one point that she wishes that he died instead of his brother. I was just fascinated by the character portrait and how sharp of a script it is, but I did feel like it gave us enough nuggets of information that we could kind of sew together who we think this person is.
I'm more talking about him in relation to Ferrari, what it is that makes him tick on a business level. So I got all the personal details. I think all that is great.
I think it's masculinity. I think, no, I mean, not to be cliche, but I think it's toxic masculinity. I've unfortunately met men like Ferrari that I think if I saw this characterization, I wouldn't think it was very realistic unless I knew people like this. I've known people who know that they are going to lose and they say, giving up isn't in my language. Shit like that. That's extremely impractical. Yet the only thing they can think about is their ambition and being the best. That is the only thing.
Well, if there's one thing I'm sure we could agree on in terms of subtext and a deep character portrait, it would be Penelope Cruz. From the moment you laid eyes on her character, you were like, man, she is going through it. She looks so burdened by her depression, but she also seems so certain of herself. She walks with such a force. Her feet are intensely anchored to the ground.
Can I just tell you the two words I wrote down for her in that first scene were scorn and exhaustion.
She is exhausted in this movie. Her character is filled with so much mysterious subtext. And that first moment that we see her in the movie where she comes in, she busts into the office with Ferrari in it and she chides him for not being there at time. She takes her gun and she throws this warning shot right off the side of his head into the wall. And this shot said everything you needed to know about her character in one little scene.
Which, by the way, when we saw that in the trailer, I said, oh gosh, that's really annoying. They must be giving away a climax. Like she's pointing a gun at him because she's so dissatisfied. No, that's where the movie begins. The 10 minutes in, she's pointing a gun at him.
Another notable moment is when she finds that Enzo has purchased another property. And so she decides to go to this property to find out who's living there, why has he bought this property. When she arrives, she finds out that a child is living there and a woman. She also notices a little toy, a car toy. And she doesn't even to say anything. This is where the subtext really came into play here because she has nothing to say, but looking at this toy, you could tell exactly what she's feeling. From the way that she looked at it, you can interpolate that she recognized this toy because she also takes it with her.
Yeah.
So why would you take a toy with you that was a model Ferrari if it didn't hold some kind of prominence in your brain? So I think just paired with the way she was looking at it and her taking it, I feel like it had to be her deceased son's, and which Enzo had taken from maybe the bedroom and given it to his new son, because she is scorned by this moment. She comes home in a rampage, and I think it has less to do with the house than it has to do with the replacement of her deceased son.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I actually had a vaguely different interpretation, although I don't think much matter, is that when she saw the toy, she recognized, like she knew what was going on the whole time. And as soon as she saw the toy, she said, oh my gosh, there's a child involved. It's not just a mistress. But either way, it goes to exactly what you're talking about, which is she realizes that there's a split love that Ferrari has that is being given to someone else. And perhaps that's in the moment that her scorn is more justified because she realizes all of the love that has been lacking in her marriage is going elsewhere.
And that has a lot to say about Ferrari's character as well, because later on, when he comes home, he walks right past the toy, which you see is on the back countertop.
Yeah, genius.
It's really illuminating towards his egotism that he didn't even notice it in the first place.
I loved Cruz's character in this film, and I think it's because characters like these often get a bad rap, whether it's like Skylar White from Breaking Bad, or frankly, a lot of times in Michael Mann scripts, these characters don't get a lot of characterization. They don't get a lot of depth. They're really just there to keep their man from greatness, at least in the eyes of the script. I've never found that those characters are really given their due, but here Penelope Cruz's character is certainly given her due. Frankly, I think that her performance is just as nuanced as Driver's. I feel like Lisa balances Enzo in so many interesting ways, where he has endless drive and all of this ambition. She has this business intelligence that he just seems to simply not have. He's all passion and she's all intelligence. Like she has some extraordinarily loud Oscar scenes, but she really excels in these small moments too. As I mentioned before, some of my favorite scenes in the movie are these two-handers between Cruz and Driver that are as tense as any action scene we've seen in the past 5 years.
So I want to talk a little bit about the camera work in this film, because I thought for the most part, it really complemented the narrative in the film. We get this very intense, fast-paced, shaky footage that seems handheld at times, really complements the car racing structure of those parts of the movie. And then we get these more still shots that really complement the emotional beats of the movie and the character moments that we're seeing on screen. I do think there was one aspect of the movie which unfortunately took me completely out of the film. There is this climactic race that's happening towards the end of the movie. And there is something that happens in this climactic race, which I'm not going to spoil. It is so clearly CGI'd what happens during this moment. And I don't know why they included it, but it just looks so fake.
I can't pretend I know as much about film as Michael Mann does, but when I'm looking at that scene, I have to imagine that there was a way to cut around it. And perhaps that would have been a little bit off-putting or look a little cheap, but it couldn't have looked more cheap than what the CGI looked like. I think the most difficult part of it is it's such a pivotal part of the film. The film has this intense tension and dread that something awful is going to happen around each corner, and you just never know when it's going to come. And finally it comes, and it's executed in a less than perfect fashion. I did get over it fairly quickly, but I still have the image in my mind, and I thought of how I would have done it differently. Unfortunately, it just doesn't land with as much emotional heft as I really wanted it to. Some people are loudly yelling about how terrible it is, and then other people are quietly dismissing it, and that just kind of goes to our culture, pick a side, whatever. I don't think that the film is bad because this happens, but I think it's okay to point out that this part of it could have been better.
All right, so you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I'm going to give Ferrari an A-, which sounds maybe pretty high, but I think that I'm just a sucker for what I said before, which is smoldering tension. I really like to go to movies and just feel pretty uncomfortable, pretty on the edge of my seat, to feel like these people are not being valorized, they're more being interrogated, and I think Michael Mann does just a very extraordinary job here. I'm also a big fan of his earlier films, particularly his 80s and 90s output and his early 2000s output. To see him come back with this force was just really awesome to me. So yeah, I just think this film is really worthwhile.
I agree. I do think this is a worthwhile movie to see. I do give it a B. I enjoyed it. I just didn't enjoy it as much as you, apparently.
Cuckoo.
You came out of this movie like...
I was hyped.
Yes, you were
I was hyped.
I did not share the same hype.
I texted our friend Derek, and I was like, Ferrari was lit.
No, I do think it was really good. I really enjoyed the tension. I thoroughly enjoyed Penelope Cruz's character. I know I talked about it as being a little bit of a weak point, but I do love how some of these biopics are taking the standpoint of a relationship drama, really, and getting into the psyches of these characters, and maybe that informs a little bit about the things we already know so much about them in general.
I think biopics have this idea that we need to go from birth till death, where you could take a very turbulent 3-month period and imply and talk about all of these other things that happen that are affecting this 3-month period.
That being said, one thing I do love that this biopic did was that it prompted me to go learn more about Ferraris after the movie, because there was some, I think, glaring omissions maybe from the end. There's a great part in the movie where he specifically leaks to the press that Ford might be interested in buying the stake, and he's done this purposefully to get Fiat to be interested. And the movie has this one moment where the owner of Fiat calls him, and it's just left as, "We'll talk tomorrow morning," but you never know whether that conversation happens. And so my fingers were going right after the movie. It's just like, okay, what happened? Did Fiat end up buying control?
Matt's our Wikipedia fact checker. Yeah, for sure.
But what's really cool is that it was part of Fiat till like 2013 or 2016. I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of those years. Then it became an independent company again. But like 23% is still owned by the family of Fiat. All these little details are really cool, and I was really excited to learn more.
Maestro or Ferrari?
Maestro.
Ferrari.
Should we have a battle?
Like like a movie wars?
A movie wars?
Yeah, movie wars. No. That's not fun. I like Maestro. You like Ferrari. It's fine. I think that actually they're both equally well made. It's just that they go to different things that you and I look for more touched by. That's really all.
But I also found them very similar in many ways.
They are very similar in a lot of ways. They're done dramatically differently, but I think that a lot of their approaches are similar.
All right, and that's it for our review of Ferrari. Ferrari is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about Ferrari? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.